Yeah, unfortunately, Nala Pup, we gotta talk about Joe Biden more, and we gotta talk about Russia and Ukraine more. Um, do you still have that LA Times article defending Joe Biden and Hunter Biden's corruption, Burisma, Ukraine, all that? Yeah, you still have it? Oh, you have the graphics put together for me? Perfect. All right, let's get into it.
There's one thing that a lot of Democrats even do wonder about, and that is Hunter Biden, your son, was getting paid a lot of money to serve on the board of a Ukrainian energy company facing serious corruption charges. You were the vice president running point on Ukraine. The average Joe hears that and says, that sounds fishy. What's your understanding of what your son was doing for an extraordinary amount of money?
I don't know what he was doing. I know he was on the board. I found out he was on the board after he was on the board, and that was it. And there's nobody.
Well, you've had a lot of time. Isn't this something you want to get to the bottom of?
No, because I trust my son.
But that doesn't pass the smell test. Like when you're vice president, isn't there a higher standard? Don't you need to know what's happening with your family? Don't you need to put down some guardrails?
Unless there was something that was, there was something on its face that was wrong. There's nothing on its face that was wrong.
So we're continuing on with the Maidon coup. Last video was getting a little long. It was already over a half hour or so, or about a half hour long. So I saved this last part. We cut it off. It was a long, beefy story. We learned about some of the evidence of the Maidon coup. We learned about some of the historical context of the Nazism in that area. But let's look at, a little more of the United States involvement, and let's look at particularly Joe Biden. So make no mistake, this LA Times piece is a rank piece of propaganda designed to defend Joe Biden and to mask U.S. imperialism. But these journalists are really bad at their job, and they can't also, the chauvinism and the arrogance, I guess I could say, would make more sense, of Western imperialists. They just can't help but admit all this crazy stuff that they just shouldn't be saying out in the open. Let's give Joe a little read here. This is from the LA Times. Here's what Joe Biden actually did in Ukraine. And this is him in yachts. Remember, yachts is the guy? That's him in yachts. 4 days before President Trump was inaugurated, the outgoing Vice President Joe Biden was in Ukraine, his 6th visit in 7 years, to deliver a rousing farewell speech. You're fighting both against the cancer of corruption, which continues to eat away at Ukraine's democracy within, and the unrelenting aggression of the Kremlin, he told local leaders, politicians, and parliamentarians in Kiev, the capital. What a fucking crock. It's imperative that you continue to strengthen all of your anti-corruption institutions to root out those who will return Ukraine to rule by cronyism and kleptocracy, he added. Jesus Christ. The rousing speech reflected not only Biden's focus on driving out entrenched corruption in Ukraine, but also the Obama White House efforts to help the former Soviet republic on its difficult path to democracy. So she's starting the article in the year 2017, 3 years after the coup. But then she's admitting that Biden's been there, 6 times in 7 years. He's delivering farewell speeches to their government. And then he's giving them commands. It's imperative that you continue to strengthen your anti-corruption institutions by rooting out those who would return Ukraine to rule by cronyism and kleptocracy. He's referring to the last government, which was the Democratic government, and he's addressing his puppet government of the vassal state of Ukraine, right? And ironically, he's talking about cronyism and kleptocracy. I don't think the last government was perfect. I think they were probably very corrupt. A lot of governments are very corrupt, but they were also not installed by a foreign nation. They were also very neutral in playing Russia, the EU/America off each other, trying to get the best economic deal possible. And when he rejected the EU's economic deal that would have enforced austerity on Ukraine, much like what they did to Greece. He rejected that deal and negotiated a better deal with the Russians, and then we overthrew his government. But let's continue. The rousing speech reflected not only Biden's focus on driving out entrenched corruption in Ukraine, but also the Obama White House efforts to help the former Soviet republic on its difficult path to democracy. She's making it sound like they're coming out of a communist cave, the dark ages, and they're really trying hard to become this, democratic, enlightened government. They were their own democratic government before we went in and overthrew them. How is that a path to democracy? We paid a bunch of snipers to massacre people, and then we trained and armed neo-Nazis and empowered the local oligarchs. What a great path to democracy we've laid out. Biden's interest in the region goes back to his first term in the Senate in the 1970s. He focused on European affairs, and after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, he directed his attention to former Soviet states, including Ukraine, arguing they be allowed to join NATO and given economic and military support. So Biden has been saber-rattling with Russia since the 1970s, since it was the Soviet Union. And directly after the collapse of the Soviet Union, he began arguing for World War III. He began arguing to arm Ukraine, have them join NATO, offensive military alliance. That would mean that if Russia attacked them, we would have to start World War III and defend them. And we should give them, military support. That means, making sure the weapons contractors are paid. And economic support, meaning the bankers are allowed to go in there and impose austerity and give them gigantic loans that they can never pay back, that will make the bankers rich and a few oligarchs rich there who steal all that money. So they want the U.S., he wants the U.S. to, strip Ukraine of its sovereignty, pump it full of weapons, get a bunch of multinational Western corporations in there to take whatever fossil fuels and resources they have, and then impose economic austerity on them to enrich the local oligarchs, which in turn is enriching, the Western financial institutions that loan them these ridiculous sums of money in the first place that they knew they couldn't pay back. Sounds great. After Russian troops seized and occupied the Crimean Peninsula in the spring of 2014, the first post-Cold War territorial takeover by Moscow, Ukraine rose up to the top of the Obama administration agenda. Obama essentially outsourced the portfolio to his vice president, a task by most accounts Biden enthusiastically embraced. So now she's jumping back in time to 2014, the author, and she's talking about the Russian troops seized Crimea in 2014. No mention of how this Russian seizure of the Crimean Peninsula took place in 2014. No mention of how that took place after the United States did their coup and overthrew the government. Let's not even go into the historical context of Crimea, the Russian Empire, warm water ports, access for economic and military shipping. She's just ignoring reality and hopping around time back and forth to make her narrative work. And then we're admitting something here. Obama essentially outsourced the portfolio to his vice president, a task by most accounts Biden enthusiastically embraced. So then Obama suddenly, they're admitting that Ukraine's very important. They're completely glossing over the fact that the United States did a crazy move of aggression, and that's why then Moscow responded by seizing Crimea and ensuring that they have their warm water port. But they're also talking about how Obama basically appointed Biden, de facto imperial governor of Ukraine. And he was very excited to be appointed that. Remember Burisma, Hunter Biden? That like all kind of leaks back into this a little bit. When your dad's imperial governor of a country, they, might want to offer you some money to sit on their board every month, to get access and favor. And make sure that, the wheels keep moving. It's greasing the wheels, as Sam Cedar would say. Ukraine was the top one. Ukraine was the top, or one of the top 3 foreign policy issues we were concentrating on, said Mike Carpenter, Biden's foreign policy and defensive policy advisor at the time. He was front and center. Now we're driving back in time to 2014. On one trip in 2014, Biden watched anti-government protesters fill the streets of Kiev in what was become the Maidon Revolution. Within months, the pro-Russian government was ousted and replaced with pro-Western leaders. So now she's admitting that Biden was going even to the protesters in the streets in 2014, showing his de facto support to them. And then within months, that government was ousted and replaced with pro-Western leaders. She says the Yanukovych government was pro-Russian. He was not. He was pro-Ukraine. He was a neutralist. He wanted, economic deal with the EU, but he also didn't want to sever ties with Russia. The only reason he went away from the EU deal is because it was preposterous and was, designed to impoverish the people of Ukraine to enrich, just a few oligarchs, like almost every deal by the IMF is designed to do. Former aides described Biden's work after that as a kind of marriage counseling, getting the newly elected president Petro Poroshenko to cooperate with the prime minister Yatsenyuk, a political rival, whom he gave the okay for Victoria Nuland to hand select as the leader of the country. Don't forget that. Known for his bluntness, Biden warned them that Ukraine could not be seen as a, quote, basket case, or allies would lose patience, and then you'd be screwed and left at the mercy of Moscow, a former aide recalled Biden telling the men. Isn't that ironic? That's exactly what we're doing to Ukraine now, leaving them at the mercy of Moscow, which was what we were always going to do. We were never going to fight and put troops on the line to protect Ukraine. It might escalate to that point eventually, but that was never going to be the direct intention. The direct intention was to, squeeze Ukraine like a sponge and get all the water out of it possible. Who cares how many Ukrainians die as long as we get our geopolitical, economic, and military goals achieved. Ukrainians say Biden's most important contribution was showing that Washington would support Ukraine as it struggled to remain independent of Russia. They weren't struggling to remain independent of Russia. They were in the middle of brokering deals. They're a completely independent nation of Russia to the point where they hold the Russian economy in their hands because so much of it has to flow through Ukraine to get to Europe. That's why Nord Stream 2 is so important, and that's why the United States took it away. So they're not struggling to stay independent of Russia. It's Russia who's struggling to stay sovereign as a nation through the aggression of American imperialism. We want to choke out Russia and China, Iran, North Korea. These are all countries that stand in defiance of our political and economic order. That's why we don't like them. Vice President Biden stood up strongly for Ukraine, and many of my fellow Ukrainians were very grateful, said Lubinsky, a former deputy foreign minister. The important thing is that the support that Biden represented was bipartisan, and that is super important. This isn't a Democratic corruption thing. This isn't a Republican thing. This is a bipartisan consensus for imperialism. Both parties will always agree on shit like this. They will always agree on giving weapons to crazy right-wingers, whether they be neo-Nazis in Ukraine, killing squads in South America, jihadists in Syria. We are always willing to arm, I shouldn't say right-wingers, I should say fundamentalists, extreme authoritative people who are willing to use violence in order to carry out their political goals. We are always willing to arm those people, and they're usually very oppressive right-wingers. They usually are. So yeah, this is always bipartisan support. So here comes some more bullshit. Few here doubt that Hunter Biden was offered a lucrative position on the board of Burisma Holdings, a national gas company controlled by a controversial businessman because of his father's prominence. They're like, oh yeah, of course he was hired because his dad's Joe Biden, but it's common in Eastern Europe and much of the world to hire a celebrity or relative of a senior official to burnish a company's image and to help shield it from official or unofficial shakedowns. Everyone's doing it, bro. It's no big deal. Don't look over there. It's not important. Of course it's not important. Why would it be important? We didn't overthrow their government. Biden's not like, their de facto governmental leader. No, they weren't doing corruption to curry favor with Joe Biden directly because he has so much power over them. No, that has nothing to do with it. But the octaves gave ammunition to Trump and his lawyer, Rudolph Giuliani. They have falsely claimed that Biden pressured Poroshenko's government to sack its top prosecutor, Viktor Shokin, to prevent him from investigating Burisma. You guys remember this? Remember this story? Current and former U.S. and Ukrainian officials say Burisma has been under scrutiny for alleged improper acquisition of licenses, a probe unrelated to Hunter Biden's position on the board. The investigation went dormant, they said, before Biden and a group of U.S. allies pushed for Shokin's ouster in 2015, arguing he was turning a blind eye to corruption. That's how you just know it's bullshit. We overthrow a government to make money, right? For the military people who build the weapons, for the fossil fuel people who want all the natural gas in Ukraine. We do the most corrupt thing possible, and then we're going to say someone else is turning a blind eye to corruption, and that's why we're firing them. Meanwhile, it's the vice president of a foreign nation who's ordering this, and his son has a job on the board of an energy company in that nation where he earns, more than people earn in a year every single month to do nothing when he doesn't know anything about energy, Ukraine, any of it. But yeah, turn that blind eye to corruption. That's why we got to fire him. We're all about, looking corruption dead in the eye here. In December 2015, Biden gave an impassioned address to the Rada, the parliament, to condemn the scourge of corruption and demand reform of the prosecutor general's office. So Biden's not an imperial governor or anything. He's just going to their parliament and making demands, right? The parliament exploded in applause. Even those who were corrupt as hell, they were electrified and sincere in their applause. Biden was like the big brother coming to tell the little brother what to do, a recommendation that you can't ignore, Bereza said. A recommendation that you can't ignore. You can't ignore this recommendation because Biden is your imperial overlord. Yeah, he is like a big brother because, he's not really in charge, and his big brother Barack Obama is not really in charge. It is the oligarchs in charge. So Biden is like a big brother coming to tell the little brother what to do. And yeah, the parliament definitely exploded in applause because they know when to kneel down and kiss the ring. I mean, most of the people, if not almost all the people in that room, are probably empowered because of the coup that the United States and Biden backed. The vice president had planned to announce a $1 billion in U.S. loan guarantees for Ukraine. But en route to Kiev on Air Force Two, Biden changed his mind. Poroshenko was dragging his feet, building the institutions needed to take on corruption, aides said. Biden and his staff rewrote the speech, removing the loan guarantees. So Biden is this, according to the LA Times, is this anti-corruption crusader, right? who's willing to hold billions of dollars in loan guarantees for Ukraine over their head, forcing them to do internal politics. If that isn't like an admission of imperialism, I don't know what is, right? Biden is withholding money from foreign nationals until they do what he wants in regards to their prosecutor general's office and firing and hiring new people. And by the way, the person that they want fired says that it was because he was looking into Hunter Biden being on the board of Burisma. But let's continue. In Kiev, Biden privately informed Poroshenko of the decision and the demand, fire Shokin or you lose the loan guarantees. So once again, making demands, forcing them to do things in their internal politics. Poroshenko was clearly disappointed. Biden's national security advisor at the time said, that was Colin Kahl. In an interview, Poroshenko recalled heated but cordial discussions with Biden. He said the loan guarantees were contingent on meeting IMF, International Monetary Fund, benchmarks. Well, what do you know? The government they outed wouldn't take the shitty IMF loans that came attached to austerity, and made the deal with Russia, and then we overthrew the government. The government that's in place now, they're talking about how, the way they operate is contingent on meeting International Monetary Fund benchmarks, including replacing the prosecutor general. Biden was not alone in his demands, Poroshenko said. So it wasn't just Biden. So you're hearing all the excuses of why they're not corrupt. But while they're giving all these excuses of why they're not corrupt, they're admitting the way the empire works and how we execute pressure on foreign countries. She's not getting into the dirty side, but it's her imperialism is showing. She's just admitting all the ways we put pressure on diplomatically. Pressure on us came from everywhere. The activists, political forces, embassies, international organizations, he said, adding that the names of Hunter Biden and Burisma never came up. In 8 days before Shokin was fired in March 2016, Biden phoned Poroshenko 4 times to reiterate the U.S. position, former aides said. The Ukrainian leader finally relented and Shokin was sacked. So who is this Shokin guy? Western diplomats saw Shokin, who still sometimes wore his old Soviet-style uniform, as a relic of a stultified system and a pay-to-play prosecutor. Shokin, who declined to be interviewed for this story, blames his ouster on an illegal foreign intervention in Ukraine's domestic affairs. Now that's starting to sound like something a little more legitimate here. Sounds like maybe he was pissed about the coup, that maybe he's a relic of a non-Western puppet government, right? It's not to say Shokin is a great guy. I really don't know much about him, his politics. We might not agree on much, but it seems to me like he's a relic from a time period of where they weren't Western sycophants and puppets in Ukraine, and that maybe the coup rubbed him the wrong way, and that maybe he was looking into Hunter Biden to try and, maybe rub Joe Biden the wrong way, and maybe try and, ruffle some feathers there. I don't know what his goals were. I don't know what he was actually doing, but that's what it seems like to me. And stultify, I had to look it up. I don't know what the fuck that word means. These people are so pretentious when they write. Cause to lose enthusiasm and initiative, especially as a result of a tedious or restrictive routine. To appear foolish or absurd. I don't know. Either could apply, like that she's shitting on the communist system as foolish or shitting on the communist system as tedious and restrictive. Either way, she's annoying for using this word, but now we all know it. We've learned something because of this author's pretentiousness. My actions as general prosecutor did not suit the interests of the U.S. Vice President Biden and the persons connected to him, Shokin said in an affidavit filed September 4th in an Austrian court on a separate case. He said Biden was motivated by his son's connection to Burisma, but offered no evidence. Ukrainian officials say the inquiry into the alleged improprieties at Burisma has never been completely closed. So a little peek into some of the imperial powers of Joseph Biden over a vassal state like Ukraine. And the way we get that peek into that little window is the Hunter Biden story, right? So this person writing a whole article trying to defend Hunter and Joe Biden as non-corrupt and, don't believe your lying eyes and all the stuff they're saying is all an effort to try and hide corruption and imperialism. At the same time, they're exposing it with their arrogance. And it's quite funny to me. But let's listen to a little more of the Victoria Nuland call. There's a little more I want you to hear.
To gain altitude, the Russians will be working behind the scenes to try to torpedo it. And again, the fact that this is out there right now, I'm still trying to figure out in my mind why Yanukovych did that. But in the meantime, there's a Party of Regions faction meeting going on right now, and I'm sure there's a lively argument going on in that group at this point. But anyway, we could land Jelly side up on this one if we move fast. So let me work on Klitschko, and if you can just keep, I think we want to try to get somebody with an international personality to come out here and help to midwife this thing. And then the other issue is some kind of outreach to Yanukovych, but we probably regroup on that tomorrow as we see how things start to fall into place.
So on that piece, Jeff, when I wrote the note, Sullivan's come back to me, VFR, saying you need Biden, and I said probably tomorrow for an attaboy and to get the deets to stick. So okay. Biden's willing.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thanks.
Biden's willing. Biden signing off on, Yachts being the guy. So, that's Victoria Nuland talking to Jeffrey Piot on the phone call. Remember, they're discussing the replacement leadership of Ukraine post the Maidon coup. And right there, directly talking about how Joe Biden needs to sign off on it. And she's going to get the attaboy from him, and he already approves of it. It's basically he's going to rubber stamp what she's done. So that's showing how Joe Biden is indeed, the imperial overlord of Ukraine. We went into how Victoria Nuland was, the architect of what was happening over there. And, you're seeing how he signed off on what happened. And in case you're forgetting what's happening in Ukraine and why this is all going on in reality.
Moreover, as one witness put it during our impeachment inquiry, the United States aids Ukraine and her people so that we can fight Russia over there and we don't have to fight Russia here.
So the United States pumps a bunch of weapons into Ukraine and overthrows their government and steals their natural resources and imposes austerity on the people of Ukraine, uses them as cannon fodder, arms and trains Nazis, and unleashes them on the population so we could fight Russia over there and we don't have to fight Russia over here.